Let's add some camera effects to this image. First one I'm gonna add is vignetting. The easiest way to do it is by painting some black colors in a new layer, and it also allows you to paint exactly where you want. Darken only those parts where you think it's necessary. For example, you want to leave this area brighter, so you don't paint the black in that area. And then just drop down the opacity. It usually works better if you use multiple layers, so it gives a more gradual vignette, with the corners more black. Okay, like that. Let's blur it a bit. And drop down the opacity. Right, like this. You can also use a slightly different approach where you make a mask for an adjustment layer. In 32-bit mode this is great if you're using exposure adjustment layer, since it gives the most realistic result. But in 16-bit mode you can use something like brightness and contrast, curves, let's say curves, and darken everything like this. Maybe make it slightly contrastier as well. And then in this mask, press Ctrl I to invert it, and with a white brush, just paint in those areas where you think the vignetting is necessary. Okay, let's lower those whites a bit. Okay, and this gives you a bit more control over how exactly that vignette looks. For example, you can add some contrast, you can lower the contrast, you can lift the white point exactly to the point where you want it. Okay, so this gives you a lot more control than just simply painting over with a black color. And there's another method you can use, it's called photo filter, but it has to be applied to a single layer. You can't create an adjustment layer for that and keep it non-destructive. So copy merged. Okay. Paste it and run filters lens correction. And this allows you to set the amount of vignetting and move the midpoint closer to the center and move it outwards. And this usually gives a natural result that you would see from a camera, where vignetting is probably equal in all four corners. And but I think it doesn't give you a lot of creative possibilities, so usually don't use it that much. I prefer painting some adjustment layers or simple black color. So those are some methods you can use. Now let's look at some ways you can add chromatic aberrations to your image. Chromatic aberrations are a distortion where you see some purples, greens, or magentas and blues around edges of the objects, especially against bright lights. You can also use the lens filter, lens correction filter for this, and this allows you to tweak it in a very subtle way. Okay, so let's zoom in, and you can see that there's some fringing appearing here. Okay, and the key is to keep it very low key. Don't make it look like this. Make it look more like this, where this very subtle effect around the edges. If you make it too strong, it's gonna look like it was taken with a shitty, cheap camera, and it's just not gonna look good. It's gonna look cheap and very unrealistic. So keep it subtle. Try which shift you need to add. I prefer green and magenta myself. Okay, so that's one way you can add it, and another way is by doing it manually, but you also need a copy of the layers, like this, a merged copy of the layers. And what you do is you go to blending options of this layer and remove one of the channels. For example, the green one, and move in and move the layer to the right or to the left, whichever you want. So let's move it to the left, and you can see this effect going on. It's quite a bit stronger than if you were using the lens filter, so you have to reduce the opacity a bit to make it weaker. Okay, just keep it subtle. And to make it as realistic as possible, you can use a simple mask that's gonna make sure you see this fringing only on the bright spots of the image. For example, if we don't want it here where it's dark, there's no backlight going on, we want it only where we see light behind dark objects. This is usually where it happens in real world. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a custom mask. Okay, so paste a copy of all your layers, reduce the saturation, let's blur it. So we have general areas and not any sharp objects. We have general white, black and gray areas. And then just use some curves to bring in more contrast and make those whites whiter and blacks darker. And this should make sure that our chromatic aberrations appear only on the white spots if you use this image as a mask for this one. So let's zoom in, and you can see that you have the chromatic aberrations here where it's bright, and here in these dark spots you don't see them. And that's pretty much what we want. So just reduce the opacity a bit, something like 50% in this case, and you have a very subtle, realistic chromatic aberration effect. Right, so that's an advanced method you can use. It's non-destructive, you can hide it anytime you want, and you can adjust exactly where you want them to appear. The next thing I want to show you is how to add some light leaks or lens flares and things like that. For light leaks you can just use regular painting, just with some brushes, paint some light leaks, distort them with the finger tool or smudge tool, however it is called. Okay, for large images it can take a bit of time to use the smudge tool, so it's smart not to use it too much. Okay, just very subtle. And you can just reduce the opacity, for example, like this, and you have this blooming light leak. You can also try different blending modes like overlay or soft light, and it's going to give a bit more subtle effect, still keeping those darks dark, but adding some lights to the lighter areas. Okay, soft light probably works the best for this one. And you can also take some of these images you can find on the internet or photograph yourself with some lens flares or light leaks or whatever, but what you need is something that is on a black background. Once you have an image on a black background, you can copy it, paste on top of your file, on top of your layer stack, and transform it to fit your image. You don't need too many details here, you can make it quite blurry, so feel free to enlarge smaller flares, like so. It doesn't matter if there's not a lot of quality here. Just set the blending mode to screen and you have these lens flares. Make them more subtle. And you can also modify them. For example, you want to clone out this one, you don't want it here. You want to bring this up. Okay. All right, and let's blur it a bit. and something like that, for example. Okay, sorry about that. And set it to screen, reduce the opacity, and there's your lens flare. It's quite subtle, but it's there and you can see it in some areas of your image. If you set it to soft light, the black background will make everything darker. So the best blending mode for this example with black background is screen. Okay. If you want to make some parts weaker, you can either use a mask, which is the best non-destructive technique. So just with some lowered opacity, I'm going to paint some black here, here, and then make it a bit weaker. Right, so that's how you can add some light leaks or lens flares from photographic images. That's pretty much it for the most common camera effects. And keep in mind you have to use them with caution. Don't make it too strong, don't go overboard. Don't make it like this and then just throw on crazy chromatic aberrations and call it finished. It's gonna look like shit. Okay, a lot of people make something like this. They're happy with it, but I don't know. I think it's very tacky. So keep it very subtle, guys, okay?